I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two because of something so small it could have been a mistake, something hidden in a bathroom trash can like a dirty secret that didn't belong to me. 3 weeks. That's how long I hadn't seen my boyfriend Max, because life decided to pile everything on my shoulders at once. My car dying in the rain, deadlines at work, stress chewing through my sleep like termites. We still texted. We still said good morning. We still pretended we were fine. But his messages had changed, shorter, colder, like he was replying out of obligation, not love. So when Friday finally came and I picked him up from work, I felt relief so sharp it almost hurt. Max slid into my passenger seat, smelled like his cologne and office air conditioning, and he did this thing where he touched my arm and said, "I'm sorry I've been distant. Work's been insane. I'll do better." I wanted to believe him so badly that I let the words wrap around my ribs like a bandage. We drove to his apartment, 2 bedrooms, shared with his roommate Jenny. Jenny wasn't home. Max went upstairs to change, calling over his shoulder that we'd be late for dinner if he couldn't find something less corporate. I went to the downstairs bathroom near the kitchen, just to wash my hands and toss a gum wrapper. The trash bin was small. The liner was thin. And right on top, like it had been placed there on purpose, was a condom wrapper. My brain did this fast, desperate sprint. No, not here, not Max. We don't even use these. Because we didn't. Not for months. We'd had the conversations, the tests, the trust. My throat tightened. My fingers went numb. And then, because denial is a fragile thing, I moved a tissue aside. The condom was there. Used. I stood over that trash can, staring like the room might rearrange itself into an explanation. The air felt too loud. My heartbeat sounded like a warning siren. I washed my hands again, even though I hadn't touched anything that could stain me more than what I'd already seen. Then I called up the stairs. "Max," I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine. "Can you come down here for a second?" When he appeared, half-dressed and confused, I pointed toward the bathroom and asked the question that would rewrite everything. "Why is there a used condom in your trash when we don't use condoms?" His face went still, too still. And that's when I knew, before he even opened his mouth, that whatever came next was going to cost me something I couldn't get back. I'm 27, and I work a job that looks calm from the outside but feels like a constant juggling act up close. Client calls, deadlines, meetings that multiply like rabbits the moment you finally catch your breath. I'm the kind of woman who plans, who remembers birthdays, who keeps spare chargers in her bag, who believes effort is love in action. And for the longest time, that's what I thought I had with Max. Max was 26, worked at a marketing firm, and had this effortless charm that made people lean in when he talked. He wasn't flashy, more the type who could make a quiet joke at the right moment, and suddenly the whole table was smiling. We didn't meet in some movie-perfect way. We met through mutual friends back in college, 5 years earlier, and for a long time we lived in that warm, easy space called friendship. The kind where you know someone's favorite snack, their stress habits, their laugh when they're trying not to laugh. Last year, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a confession in the rain or a sudden kiss at a party. It was more like, one day we were talking, and the next day we were still talking, but the pauses lasted longer and the eye contact held tighter. And when we finally admitted it, "This feels different now," it felt natural, like we'd been walking toward it the whole time. We'd been officially dating 8 months. Not forever, but long enough for routines to form, long enough to blend weekends and toothbrushes, to learn each other's morning moods, to have the "what are we doing here" talks without flinching. Max had 2 serious relationships before me. One in college that lasted 3 years, and one after that for about 2 years. He stayed on decent terms with both exes, which I used to admire. It felt like maturity, like emotional control. He'd say things like, "I don't do messy endings." I took that as a green flag. Now I can't help wondering if it was just practice. Because in the 5 years I'd known him, he never came off as manipulative. He didn't play games. He didn't disappear for days and come back with excuses. He was consistent, kind, present. That's what made the last month feel like a crack in a wall I didn't even know existed. It started with chaos that wasn't romantic at all. My life hitting a rough patch in plain, unglamorous ways. My car got backed into in a parking lot, leaving me dealing with insurance calls and repairs I didn't have time for. 2 days later, the engine completely died on the highway during a rainstorm, the kind that makes the world blurry and cold and hostile. The repair shop told me the engine was beyond saving. That sentence alone felt like a punishment I couldn't afford. Work didn't care. Work never cares. My boss added 3 new clients to my plate with deadlines that felt like a dare. My days were stacked. My nights were restless, and I didn't see Max for nearly 3 weeks because my schedule and his schedule passed each other like strangers on the sidewalk. We talked at first, but during that stretch, we had 2 small arguments. Nothing explosive. The first was me canceling dinner because a client emergency landed in my lap. The second was me missing his call 3 times in one evening because I was buried in paperwork trying to figure out how to pay for a replacement car. We resolved them quickly. We did what adults do. We apologized. We promised to be patient. But afterward, his texting changed. Less warmth, less detail. Morning. Hope your day was okay. Busy. No stories about his work. No teasing. No questions about how I was holding up. It was like the emotional volume got turned down until all that was left was static. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself I was overthinking. But something in me, some quiet instinct that I'd learned to respect, kept tapping on the inside of my ribs, whispering, "Pay attention." And then Friday came, the first time I'd seen him in weeks. I picked him up from work, and he apologized right away, promising to do better. I let myself exhale. I thought the worst thing waiting for me that night was an awkward conversation about communication. I had no idea I was about to find proof that communication wasn't the real problem. Looking back now, the signs were there, but they were subtle enough to slip past someone who wanted to believe. After those 2 small arguments, Max didn't pull away dramatically. He didn't disappear. He didn't start fights. What he did was quieter, and in some ways, more unsettling. He became efficient. Our conversations lost their texture. Where he used to send voice notes rambling about office drama or random thoughts he had on the train home, now I got clean, trimmed sentences. Polite, functional. Like we were coworkers checking in, not partners missing each other. When I asked how his day was, he'd say, "Fine, busy." When I shared something stressful, he'd respond with, "That sucks," followed by nothing else. No follow-up, no curiosity, no "tell me more." At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I was the one who'd been distracted, the one who canceled plans, the one who missed calls. I wondered if he felt sidelined and didn't know how to say it, so I tried to compensate, sending longer messages, checking in more, asking if he was okay. He always said yes. That was the problem. Yes, but flat. Yes, but distant. Yes, without warmth. There were other things, too. Little things that didn't add up, but didn't scream either. He stopped suggesting we FaceTime at night. Said he was exhausted. When I joked about how long it had been since we'd seen each other, he laughed. But it sounded forced, like he was hitting the right cue instead of feeling it. Once, during a phone call, I heard music in the background. Not TV noise. Music. I asked where he was. "Just at home," he said quickly. "Jenny's playing something upstairs." Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. At the time, I let it go. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who interrogated every detail. I'd always believed trust meant giving someone room to exist without constant scrutiny. And Max had never given me a reason not to trust him before. Still, my body knew before my mind caught up. I slept lightly during those weeks. I checked my phone too often. I reread texts, looking for tone where there was none. When he didn't respond for hours, I told myself he was busy, then felt stupid for feeling relieved when he finally replied. The imbalance crept in slowly. I was leaning forward. He was leaning back. And every time I felt that tug of anxiety, I reminded myself of our history. 5 years of knowing each other. 8 months of a relationship that, until recently, felt safe. You don't throw that away over vibes and feelings. Except, feelings are often data we don't know how to translate yet. The night I picked him up for dinner, I remember watching him walk out of his office building. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He leaned in to kiss me hello, and it felt familiar, but slightly off, like muscle memory performing without emotion. In the car, when he apologized for being distant, I didn't accuse him. I didn't unload everything I'd been holding in. I just nodded and said I understood, because I wanted the version of us that didn't need a conversation like this to survive. We talked about neutral things on the drive. Work gossip, a show we both watched, what we might order for dinner. We avoided the fragile spots like we both knew they might crack if pressed. When we got to his apartment and he went upstairs to change, I sat on the couch and looked around the living room. Everything looked normal. His shoes by the door. A half-empty mug on the table. nothing out of place. That's what still gets me. There was no obvious betrayal written on the walls, no dramatic clues, just a growing sense that I didn't fully exist in his life the way I used to. I went to the bathroom to wash my hands, thinking about nothing more than how late we were running. And that's when the seed of doubt, already planted, already watered, finally broke through the surface. Because some truths don't announce themselves. They wait quietly in the trash until you're close enough to see them. The moment I saw it, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. Heat rushed to my face. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I'd missed a step on a staircase. I remember gripping the edge of the sink because suddenly the room felt unsteady, like it had tilted a few degrees to the left. A used condom in Max's bathroom, in his private trash can. I stared at it longer than I want to admit, like if I stared long enough it would turn into something else. Trash from a prank, proof of a misunderstanding, anything but what it was. The wrapper was crumpled, the foil dull under the light. The condom itself was unmistakable, folded in on itself in a way that left no room for imagination. We didn't use condoms. We hadn't for months. I remember thinking, this can't be real, and then immediately thinking, it is. You're looking at it. My hands were shaking as I washed them again. Scrubbing like guilt could be contagious. I dried them slowly, took a breath that didn't reach my lungs, and called his name. Max, I said, trying and failing to keep my voice steady. Can you come down here? He came quickly, still buttoning his shirt, concern already on his face like he could sense something was wrong. That alone twisted something in me. He wasn't confused. He wasn't relaxed. He looked alert. I pointed toward the bathroom. Why is there a used condom in your trash? I asked, when we don't use condoms. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on my ears. Max didn't answer right away. He stood there, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed somewhere just past me. I watched his throat move as he swallowed, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Then his body started to shake. I swear, he said finally, his voice breaking. It's not mine. It's not what you think. Tears filled his eyes so fast it was almost impressive. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice, like the movement might shake the truth loose. According to him, he had stayed at his dad's house from Tuesday night into Wednesday morning that week. While he was gone, Jenny's younger sister and her boyfriend had used his bedroom because Jenny had a friend staying over in the living room. He said he'd known the sister's boyfriend from college, that they were comfortable enough in his space, and that they must have used his bathroom and thrown the condom away there. The explanation poured out fast, practiced sounding but frantic, like he'd been rehearsing it without knowing it. I listened, I nodded, I asked questions. Why would they use your bathroom instead of the guest one? Why would a condom from midweek still be on top of the trash on Friday? He gestured around wildly, pointed out the soda cans and takeout containers in his room, said he'd barely thrown anything away because work had been exhausting and he'd been living on caffeine and leftovers. As he spoke, something shifted. His fear turned into anger, not at me, but at Jenny's sister. He started talking about boundaries, about how inappropriate it was for someone to use his space like that, about how furious he was going to be when he confronted her. That pivot didn't sit right with me. We went upstairs to his bedroom and the air felt thick with things neither of us knew how to say. I sat on the edge of his bed, my hands clasped together so tightly my fingers ached. He stood by his dresser, crying openly now, saying he loved me, saying he'd never throw us away for something meaningless. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. For nearly an hour, we sat there in silence, broken only by sniffles and the hum of the apartment. Finally, I told him the truth. Finding that condom was the most humiliating moment of my life. It felt like a knife sliding between my ribs, slow and deliberate. He swore again that he was innocent. So I made a request, a simple one. I want to be there, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. When you confront Jenny's sister, I want to hear it myself. That's when his face changed. No, he said immediately. Too quickly. He said it would cross a boundary, that they were his friends, not mine. That I should trust him to handle it and tell me what happened afterward. He said if the situation were reversed, he'd give me that trust. The room went quiet again. Because if he was innocent, this was the moment to prove it. And he had just shut that door in my face. Dinner plans were forgotten. We argued in low, controlled voices, circling the same point from different angles. The confrontation couldn't happen that night anyway. Jenny and her sister weren't home. He promised he'd talk to them the next day. I left his apartment with my chest tight and my thoughts racing. In my car, I sat there for a long time before starting the engine, because I realized something on that drive home. Even if he hadn't cheated, even if his story was somehow true, his refusal to let me see the truth for myself had already fractured something vital. And once trust cracks, it doesn't need much pressure to break completely. The drive home felt endless. Every red light stretched too long. Every familiar street looked slightly distorted, like I was moving through a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the way Max froze, the speed of his explanation, the instant refusal when I asked to be present for the confrontation. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't crying. That scared me more than anything. At home, I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there in the dark, still wearing my coat, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed in my hand, text from Max lighting up the screen. "I love you. Please believe me. I'm so scared of losing you." I didn't open them. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed and finally let the weight of the night settle into my bones. I asked myself the question that always comes after something breaks. What did I miss? I went back over the past month with surgical precision. The colder texts, the avoided calls, the way he'd stopped inviting me into his day. None of it proved cheating on its own. But together, layered over the physical evidence I'd seen with my own eyes, it formed a picture I couldn't unsee. Still, I tried to be fair. I told myself people panic when falsely accused, that fear can look like guilt, that not everyone reacts the way they should under pressure. I reminded myself of the man I'd known for 5 years, the man who'd never given me a reason to doubt him before. But then there was that refusal, that hard, immediate no. If I were innocent, I would have begged for the confrontation. I would have dragged everyone into the room if it meant clearing my name. Boundaries with friends would be irrelevant compared to saving my relationship. Max had chosen the opposite. The next morning, I did something I rarely do when I'm emotionally overwhelmed. I asked for outside perspectives. I called my oldest friend first, someone who knows my patterns, my blind spots. I laid everything out, from the condom to Max's explanation to his refusal. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said quietly, "That story has too many moving parts." I called my brother next. He listened, sighed, and said something that stuck with me. If someone accused me of cheating with physical proof, I'd move heaven and earth to prove I didn't do it. I wouldn't worry about offending anyone else. A third friend said the same thing, almost word for word. By Sunday night, my exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was moral. I was tired of twisting myself into shapes that made his story fit. Tired of silencing my instincts because I didn't want to be the woman who overreacted. I realized something important then. Even if Max hadn't cheated, and that felt increasingly unlikely, his handling of the situation had destroyed my sense of safety. Trust isn't just about fidelity. It's about transparency, about choosing your partner when it matters. And he hadn't chosen me, so I made a decision. I texted him and said I needed to talk in person. He responded immediately, relief practically dripping through the screen. He said he was glad, that he'd been terrified I was pulling away. He didn't know that I was already gone. When I went to his apartment the next evening, I brought a small bag with me. Just practical things. My charger, a jacket, a couple of books. I wasn't planning drama. I wasn't planning a scene. I was planning an ending. We sat in his living room, the same couch where we'd watched movies and shared takeout. His roommate Jenny was out, which I appreciated. I didn't want witnesses. I took a breath and told him directly that I was ending our relationship. At first, he looked stunned, then angry. He called me heartless, said I should have warned him instead of showing up like everything was fine. He accused me of talking to other people about our private business. He barely addressed the condom at all. When he did, he repeated the same line in a flat, rehearsed tone. I didn't do anything. Then, suddenly, he said he'd changed his mind. He claimed he was now willing to include me in the confrontation with Jenny's sister, that he'd spent the day writing in his diary about how much I meant to him, about choosing us. I asked why he hadn't told me sooner. He didn't have an answer. And that was it. I told him it was too late. That trust doesn't fracture loudly. It erodes quietly, and once it's gone, promises don't bring it back. As I gathered my things, his anger turned to pleading. Promises, tears, vows to be better. At the door, I said the last honest thing I had left. I was ready to do anything for you, but you threw that away. I walked out without looking back. And for the first time since that Friday night, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt final. The week after the breakup was a blur of contradictions. Some mornings, I woke up convinced I'd done the only sane thing. Other nights, I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past month, wondering if I'd thrown away something real over fear and timing. Grief has a way of shape-shifting like that, clarity by day, doubt by night. I blocked Max on social media almost immediately. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing his name pop up like nothing had happened. I didn't block his number, though. A small practical part of me said we might still need to coordinate returning things or untangling mutual plans. Another part, quieter, more dangerous, wasn't ready to fully close the door. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a name I didn't expect. Jenny, Max's roommate. We'd always been friendly in that polite, peripheral way. Small talk in the kitchen, borrowed chargers, nothing deeper. So when she asked if we could meet for coffee, my stomach tightened immediately. I almost said no, but curiosity and something else I couldn't name won out. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Jenny arrived early, already seated, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd rehearsed what she needed to say but still dreaded saying it. She didn't waste time. She told me there had been no overnight guests in their apartment that week. Her younger sister had stopped by briefly one afternoon, but she'd left after a couple of hours. No boyfriend, no sleepover, no one using Max's bedroom. Then Jenny said something that made my chest go cold. Max hadn't stayed at his dad's house that week either. His father had been out of town on a fishing trip the entire time. The room seemed to narrow around us as she spoke. Each sentence stripped another layer off the story I'd been asked to swallow. Jenny apologized for not telling me sooner, for feeling caught in the middle, for not knowing the full story until Max told her about our fight. She said once she put the pieces together, she couldn't sit with it anymore. I thanked her for being honest. I asked her not to tell Max we'd spoken. She agreed and admitted she was already looking for a new apartment. Living with him had become uncomfortable. That night, Max texted me asking to meet. Said he had proof now. Said everything would make sense. I didn't go. Instead, I told him I knew his story about his dad, and Jenny's sister wasn't true. I told him not to contact me again unless it was about exchanging belongings. What followed was chaos. A flood of messages. Partial admissions tangled with new lies. Contradictions stacked on top of contradictions. First, he admitted he'd met up with an ex during our time apart, but insisted they'd only kissed once, and it didn't mean anything. Then he claimed the condom belonged to Jenny, who sometimes used his bathroom. None of it lined up. Each message dug him deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. I stopped responding. A week later, a mutual friend told me he'd seen Max at a bar with his ex. They were close, intimate, comfortable in a way that didn't look new. That confirmation hit differently. It wasn't sharp like the initial discovery. It was dull, heavy, settling. The kind of pain that comes when your worst suspicion is no longer theoretical. It's proven. 6 weeks passed. Life began to rearrange itself around the absence he left behind. I moved apartments to avoid running into him. I threw myself into work. I started playing basketball again with an old group of friends, letting sweat and motion burn off the leftover anger. Then, unexpectedly, I ran into Jenny again, this time in a grocery store. We laughed awkwardly at the coincidence and ended up sitting down for coffee right there in the store. She told me she'd moved out 3 weeks after our breakup. The atmosphere with Max had become unbearable. Before she left, she'd found something, an unfamiliar phone charger behind the couch. When she asked Max about it, he'd gotten defensive and snatched it away. Later that same night, Jenny overheard him on the phone, talking about a close call, about needing to be more careful, about almost losing everything over a stupid mistake. The final piece came when Jenny admitted she'd found Max's diary, the one he claimed he'd written in the day we broke up. Inside was an entry dated during our relationship. It talked about confusion, about reconnecting with his ex, about guilt and excitement tangled together. There was no mention of choosing me, no plan to include me in any confrontation. Jenny had taken a photo of the entry as proof. I didn't need it, but seeing it erased any lingering doubt. Later that evening, a text came from an unknown number. It was Max. He wanted to explain. I blocked the number without responding. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept through without waking up to replay the past. Because the escalation was over. There was nothing left to uncover. Just the slow, steady work of accepting that the man I thought I knew didn't exist, and maybe never had. The truth didn't arrive like a storm. It settled, quietly, heavily, like dust you don't notice until it coats every surface. After Jenny showed me the proof, after the lies finally collapsed under their own weight, I expected to feel relief, vindication, something clean and sharp that would let me draw a line under the whole thing and move on. Instead, I felt hollow. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation, the decision, the unraveling, it drained out of me all at once. What was left was a deep, bone-level exhaustion that sleep didn't fix. I went through my days on autopilot. Work, commute, gym, groceries, home. People talked to me and I responded, smiled when appropriate, laughed when expected. But inside, there was a quiet grief that didn't announce itself loudly enough for anyone else to notice. At night, when everything slowed down, the questions crept in. How long had he been lying? Which moments were real? Was any of it real? I replayed memories I used to cherish. Weekend mornings tangled in sheets, inside jokes, the way he used to look at me when he thought I wasn't watching, and wondered which version of him had been there, the man who loved me, or the man who was already keeping someone else in reserve. That was the darkest part. Not the cheating. The contingency plan. Realizing that while I was choosing him fully, he was hedging his bets, keeping a door cracked open somewhere else, just in case. I blamed myself more than I should have. I wondered if I'd been too understanding, too patient, too willing to explain away distance as stress, silence as exhaustion. I asked myself if a stronger woman would have noticed sooner, spoken up earlier, demanded clarity instead of offering grace. Some nights, I sat on the floor of my new apartment with my back against the couch, lights off, phone face down beside me, and let the ache wash over me without trying to fix it. I didn't miss him exactly. I missed who I thought we were. I missed the version of my life where trust felt simple, where love didn't require cross-referencing timelines and stories, where I didn't have to become a detective in my own relationship. One night, scrolling aimlessly because sleep wouldn't come, I found an old photo of us on my phone. Nothing dramatic, just a candid shot from a friend's birthday. We were laughing, foreheads nearly touching, caught in a moment that looked effortless. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of self-respect. That was the night I cried properly for the first time, not for losing him, but for the version of myself who had trusted without armor. The woman who believed consistency meant safety, who thought history guaranteed honesty. Grief doesn't always come with sobs and breakdowns. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just the slow realization that something you built your future around was never as solid as you thought. The lowest point came unexpectedly. I was at the grocery store, standing in line, when a song came on over the speakers, the kind of soft, forgettable background music you usually don't notice. It was one of our songs. Not officially, not labeled, but one we used to play on lazy Sundays while cooking. My throat closed instantly. I abandoned my basket and walked out, sitting in my car with my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing through the tightness in my chest. For a few minutes, all I could think was how tired I was of being strong, of being rational, of doing the right thing. I wanted something to be easy again. But in that moment, right there in the parking lot, I realized something else too. As painful as this was, it was clean. There were no more mysteries, no more wondering, no more waiting for explanations that would never make sense. The truth, ugly as it was, had given me a strange kind of clarity. I didn't want him back. I wanted myself back. And that realization, quiet, fragile, but real, was the first crack of light in a very dark place. The turning point didn't come with fireworks or a dramatic confrontation. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, in the middle of an ordinary shift, when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror at work and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked tired, but not broken. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been in weeks. I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not waiting for an apology, not waiting for closure, not waiting for him to finally explain himself in a way that made it hurt less. That chapter had already ended. I was just standing in the doorway, rereading the last page. That night, when I got home, I did something small, but symbolic. I took out a notebook, not a dramatic journal, not a manifesto, just a plain one I'd bought months ago and never used. On the first page, I wrote one sentence. I didn't lose him. I chose myself. It felt strange at first, like saying words that didn't quite fit yet. But I let them sit there. I didn't cross them out. I didn't soften them. I started paying attention to my own patterns instead of his. I noticed how my shoulders relaxed when my phone stayed silent, how my sleep slowly deepened when I stopped replaying conversations, how my appetite returned when I wasn't swallowing anxiety with every meal. I stopped framing this breakup as something that happened to me and started seeing it as something I walked away from. That shift changed everything. A few days later, Jenny texted me again. not with new information, not with drama. Just a simple message saying she hoped I was doing okay and that she admired how I'd handled everything. I stared at the screen for a long moment, because admiration wasn't something I'd associated with myself lately. That same week, a mutual acquaintance mentioned, carelessly, without malice, that Max was having a rough time, that his ex had moved on quickly, that things hadn't worked out the way he'd expected. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. For the first time since the night in the bathroom, I felt neutral. No satisfaction, no anger, just distance. And distance, I learned, is power. I went back to basketball regularly, not to punish my body, but to inhabit it again. I let myself sweat, laugh, miss shots, feel clumsy and alive. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the relationship, filling my weekends with noise and movement and conversation that didn't revolve around anyone's lies. One evening, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city settle into night, it hit me. I trusted myself. I trusted the woman who noticed when something felt off, the woman who asked the hard question instead of swallowing it, the woman who walked away without waiting for permission. That trust was something no one could take from me. A few weeks later, I received a long message from Max, from yet another number. He said he was in therapy, that he understood now why he'd sabotaged things, that he regretted everything, that he hoped someday we could talk. I read it once, then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Some conversations only reopen wounds that have finally started to heal. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. And in that quiet certainty, I felt something solid settle into place, something stronger than closure, stronger than forgiveness. Self-respect. That was the real turning point. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unraveled. Slowly, publicly, and in ways Max couldn't control. At first, I only heard fragments, passed along casually, never asked for. A mutual friend mentioning that Max had been unusually quiet. Another saying he'd stopped coming out on weekends. Someone else noting that his ex, the one he'd reconnected with, was already gone, the relationship burning out almost as quickly as it had reignited. The pattern became clear without anyone spelling it out. He'd gambled and lost. What struck me wasn't satisfaction. It was inevitability. The same traits that allowed him to lie so easily to me, the compartmentalizing, the justifications, the belief that he could manage multiple versions of the truth, didn't disappear when I did. They followed him into every room, every relationship, every conversation where trust was required. People noticed. Jenny moved out and didn't look back. Friends who had once shrugged off his inconsistencies started comparing notes. Stories didn't line up. Timelines shifted depending on who he was talking to. The charm that once smoothed everything over began to feel rehearsed. Trust eroded. I wasn't there to witness it firsthand, but I didn't need to be. The quiet distancing spoke volumes. Invitations stopped. Group chats went silent. The social circle he'd taken for granted thinned out until only a few people remained, those willing to accept half-truths without asking questions. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just steadily. I settled into my new apartment, hanging art I liked without asking for anyone else's opinion. I rebuilt routines that belonged only to me. Morning runs, late dinners, weekends that didn't require negotiation. I found joy in small grounding things, a clean kitchen, a good book, laughter that didn't feel forced. When people asked what happened between us, I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell the whole story either. I said, it didn't work out. I chose to walk away. And that was enough. One afternoon, a mutual friend, someone who'd known Max longer than I had, pulled me aside after a group workout. She hesitated, then said quietly, I owe you an apology. I didn't see it before, but I do now. I thanked her and changed the subject, because the truth didn't need witnesses anymore. Max tried once more to reach out, through someone else this time. A message passed along carefully, almost timidly. He wanted to apologize in person. No expectations, no agenda. I declined, not because I was afraid of seeing him, but because I didn't need to. The real consequence of his actions wasn't losing me. It was losing access to the version of life where people trusted his word without question, where love came easily, where explanations were believed. Those things don't disappear overnight. They dissolve, and once they're gone, no apology brings them back. As for me, I left without slamming doors, without exposing him publicly, without revenge or spectacle. I let the truth do what it always does when you stop protecting lies. It surfaced on its own. One evening, walking home after a long day, I realized something that made me stop mid-step. I felt light, not numb, not guarded. Light. The kind of lightness that comes from not carrying someone else's secrets, not managing their contradictions, not making excuses for behavior that hurts you. I hadn't won anything, but I had reclaimed myself. And that, I realized, was the only outcome that mattered. Healing didn't arrive as a single moment. It unfolded quietly, in the spaces where anxiety used to live. One night, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours, not because I was avoiding something, but because there was nothing to avoid. Another morning, I woke up without that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to greet me before my feet even touched the floor. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became mine again. I started trusting my instincts without immediately questioning them. If something felt off, I paid attention. If something felt good, I allowed myself to enjoy it without waiting for the other shoe to drop. I learned the difference between patience and self-erasure, between compassion and self-betrayal. I didn't come out of this hardened. I came out clearer. I still believe in love. I still believe people can grow and change. But I also believe that honesty is not a bonus feature. It's the foundation. And when someone shows you that they're capable of constructing entire realities just to avoid accountability, you don't owe them your understanding. You owe yourself your safety. The version of me who found that condom in the trash was shocked, disoriented, desperate to believe there was an explanation that wouldn't hurt. I don't judge her for that. She loved deeply. She trusted fully. But the woman I am now knows something important. Walking away is not failure. Choosing yourself is not cruelty, and clarity is worth the pain it takes to get there. Sometimes there is no dramatic apology that fixes everything, no perfect conversation that gives you the ending you imagined. Sometimes the lesson is simply learning to close the door yourself, gently, firmly, without waiting for permission. I didn't get the relationship I thought I had, but I got something better. I got my self-respect intact, my intuition sharpened, my future unburdened by someone else's lies. And that's enough. That has always been enough.